Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio on this day before Thanksgiving, November 26, 2014 edition. This is your host, Andrew Fisher, broadcasting every Wednesday from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to expose the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't. Today on the show, I welcome author, speaker, and UFO researcher John Ventre, who is probably best known as the Pennsylvania State Director of the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON, and I believe this is him in the queue here, area code 724. I'll let him on at no later than 10 after the hour. Got to do news first, but let me start off by saying I was at the MUFON Symposium in Cherry Hill recently. I love that conference. It was very enlightening, very informative, and even though it covers a lot of stuff that the average human being finds too crazy to believe, it is still something that everybody should be aware of. Well, the stuff we discussed at that conference from both a modern day and a ancient astronaut theory perspective in regards to UFOs and ETs. Awesome conference, and if it's in the Philadelphia area again, I'll definitely go. It's a shame Stan Friedman couldn't have been there because of that mini heart attack he suffered. That was an excellent show I did with him. I'm no doubt he'll come up in conversation a few times here. And tried to get him on Skype at that conference, but he was unable to connect. But just think the same without Stanton. I do disagree with some of the few things that Stan says, about three things I can think of, but love the guy. He woke me up, and he woke up a lot of other people who cover the ET and UFO phenomenon. But anyway, just a few more things about John Ventre here. He's also a good author because he's written a lot of books here, some novels, 12/21/2012, A Prophecy, The Day After 2012. I better talk about 2012 in this interview a little bit. UFOs over Pennsylvania, he wrote. Apophis 2029. Oh, another subject worth talking about. And An Alternative History of Mankind, and he's a lifetime member of the NRA. Oh, good. That's good, because if we lose the Second Amendment, we lose everything because the government wants to disarm us to take away the rest of our rights. Why did the Founding Fathers put the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment? So we can protect ourselves from tyrannical government. Now, the NRA was created by the government, but for all practical purposes now, it is anti-government in regards to its opinions about the right to bear arms. So as far as I'm concerned, you should support the NRA. If there are any government moles or anything in that organization, make sure they don't infiltrate the NRA, if you will. A couple of things about John Ventre here. He's appeared in UFO documentaries such as UFO Hunters and Hangar 1. Talk about some of the episodes in there and the upcoming series. Having a season 2, Hangar 1 is. I'll let him talk about that. But first, better get straight to the news here, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. Gawker writes, Ferguson rioters are helping the economy. The current rioting level is likely economically suboptimal. It does seem kind of ironic that people that can do looting and destroying stores like that are actually helping the economy. I guess there is a way to show that it is helping the economy, but what they're doing is inexcusable. The cop, as the evidence shows, did have some justification in regards to shooting Michael Brown, but the whole trial procedure so far has been totally screwed up and tyrannical and law-breaking and rights-violating and no Sixth Amendment, if you know what I mean, right to speedy trial and all the rest of that, and people knowing what they're supposed to know. In regards to trials like this, the public is not being able to be aware of what's going on. The grand jury isn't cooperating, and that's the real issue here. And now they're rioting because, well, what are they rioting about? And what specifically are they rioting for? The cop being found not guilty, not going to be indicted? Well, I mean, if the cop was justifying the shooting, then the rioting is unjustified, but maybe they are rioting because of the improper way that this was handled through the media and all, and the court system. But anyway, moving on, what they're not telling you about race riots, the truth about Michael Brown, Officer Darren Wilson, and Ferguson. Well, I don't really have time to look into this, and I've already discussed the whole issue with Ferguson, but, if they can, the media can spin something into a race war like they did with the Trayvon Martin incident, then that might cause divide and conquer among us, and we don't want to divide and conquer, because that's how the powers that be separate us. Next article, flashback, U.S. Army training to fight black Americans. Doomsday Disneyland facility used as practice ground for civil unrest. Well, when the government is practicing for civil unrest, then and they're training to fight blacks, specifically black Americans, well, I think you should be a little suspicious here that a government wouldn't train for something like that and take it seriously unless they think something was imminent, like maybe an economic collapse. The word is on the street among World Bank whistleblower Karen Hughes that gold-backed currency is set to come out in the very near future. We're going to switch to a gold-based system. Word on the street is where money is backed by gold, unlike our current money, which doesn't exist, and they charge us interest on it. But this will be gold-backed, and over a period of time will eventually phase out to a society with no money at all. Alex Collier, ET contactee, says Earth is the only planet in the Milky Way that where the extraterrestrial inhabitants use money. So if the moving to gold is a stepping stone, well, let's try to get through the stepping stone quickly so we can use money that's not backed by anything and maybe just exchange in energy or something else to that effect. I wonder how those ETs do it. Next article, Ferguson, carjacking for justice. Criminal opportunists attack media. Yes, what kind of media are you attacking? The alternative or the mainstream? Well, either one is bad. The other Ferguson riots in August, Al Jazeera, a mainstream media news company that the powers that be control, they were being attacked and tear-gassed by the police as much as the alternative media folks were who care about getting the truth. Well, when you know that the mainstream media is being attacked by the police, then, well, maybe we are moving close to a police state. So let's try to make sure that doesn't happen, folks. Next article, Twilight Zone. Texas Monthly investigates if Alex Jones is really Bill Hicks. Okay, you know what? I don't really think I need to get into this. Is he somewhat of a reincarnation of Bill Hicks? Look, I'm not even going to go there either. Next article, retired general calls for U.S. Army on streets to restore civil order. You know what the next step is, and it's called the Insurrection Act. Well, if there is rioting and civil commotion in the streets, then the government certainly has the authority to step in and stop the rioting because, well, government was created for the one and only purpose of exerting by any force to protect the rights and property of everyone under the auspices of that government. And if you don't give your individual consent to have the government take your rights, then the government doesn't have authority to take your rights because the collective group authority cannot exceed the authority of each individual member of that group before they join the group. So that is why a group of people cannot order or force you to do something, in this case take your rights in some way, if no individual in society can do the same. And the government is your servant, so they don't have authority to pass laws that take your rights. But when it comes to civil commotion like that, then yes, the U.S. Army or the military can certainly come in to quash the rebellion or whatever it is, and not necessarily rebellion, but you get my drift, and put a stop to this. Two more articles here. Professor says Mike Brown sacrificed to racist God. Robbery suspect sacrificed to the God of American whiteness. Okay, well, is he trying to spin this into a race war? I don't know. I don't have time to look into this article, but when it comes to race, folks, and anything seems like it's trying to push a whole race issue, then that's a caution. Maybe this is an attempted race war. And I already said we don't want race war because that's divide and conquer, and they control us by dividing us when they can conquer us more easily when we're divided. One last article here. Ferguson riots, immigration reform, framing coming civil war around race. What did I just say? Ferguson riots, immigration reform in this case. Establishment attempting to direct spirit of nation into destructive revolution. Well, I've already talked enough about the Ferguson riots, but one thing about immigration I want to point out. Wouldn't it be great if we could live in a world where everybody could just go from country to country and cross borders without any government permission or paperwork filing, and also fly their planes and walk across borders on public lands and dock ships and ports and no government permission and no worry? Well, that would be great. But you have to understand, at the same time, we created the government to protect our rights and property. It is within the people's authority to ask their government to secure the border and try to do a vetting process on anyone who crosses the border. So, but why does the right for us to have our government do that have to conflict with someone's right to travel from country to country? Well, when you realize that when you're bordering dangerous countries like Mexico, which are disease-ridden and filled with gangs, many are controlled by the Mexican government, by the way, you have to have some sort of border security to make sure that those diseases and whatever, if you will, don't come into America and cause problems. So in this matrix of reality that we live in, it's okay to have a process, an immigration process for people to cross the borders. But without further ado, well, first of all, let me get a drink of water because my throat's dry here. I believe this is John Ventre. Area code 724. Is this John Ventre?
Yes, that's me. I'm here. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing awesome. Great to have you on. And so one thing I want to just clarify here. Are you like the president of MUFON, or are you just the head of the Pennsylvania State Department?
Well, I've got 6 states, so I'm not the director of MUFON. The MUFON director is Jan Harzan. He was at the symposium in Cherry Hill. I have Pennsylvania, Delaware, Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Maine.
Okay, thanks
so
for
those are the 6 states. Good.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Because I live in Lower Moreland Township, which is just south of Bucks County. Southampton and Ben Salem are like the closest areas to where I live, and I know that there's a lot of UFO activity in Bucks County. I did talk about that with Bill Burns when I had him on my show, and we even talked about whether or not the Willow Grove Air Force Base is perhaps a secret hideout for UFOs, and Bill Burns said he can't confirm that it would be, but he could certainly imagine that it would be, with the military having a lot of involvement with UFOs. So with that being said, I guess we'll start off on this subject, UFOs in Bucks County. What do you have to say about that?
Well, in 2008, we had a huge UFO wave across Pennsylvania. And, it's funny how the year started with Stevensville, and Stevensville seemed to get all of the publicity. But what happened around the middle of the year is a UFO wave across Pennsylvania started. It started up in Lake Erie, and I was getting reports from people in Eastlake, Ohio, Wheeling, West Virginia. They were telling me that UFOs were coming in off of Lake Erie. They were pretty much flying south and then turning east across Pittsburgh. I'd get a call from a guy in Eastlake, Ohio, saying what he just saw, and then 5 minutes later, a guy at State College would say he saw, and it was the same description. But what happened was they seemed to be coming across the state, almost following the turnpike, I-76, and then they'd get to Philly and go northeast across Bucks County. So, we were getting less than 100 cases per year in Pennsylvania, and that particular time we got 240 cases in a 2-month period. So we got almost triple the amount of cases we normally get a year. We got that in 2 months. So and we had some really great cases. We had guys in Pittsburgh that, we had this one guy, a retired military mathematician, who took some pictures at the Pittsburgh airport, and he sent me the pictures. They looked, they have structure to them, but, we sent them up to Mark D'Antonio in, I think he's up in New Hampshire, and, Mark said that they were just like a point of light, and it was camera shake. And I said, boy, that's really odd that 3 separate pictures all look exactly the same. If I can shake my camera like an, extra sketch, whatever those games, remember? Can you imagine doing that? And they come out exactly the same 3 times in a row. But, and then we had all kinds of cases across Altoona with people seeing these UFOs. But what happened in Bucks County, that was the incredible part of it. 2 cases in particular stood out, and there were a lot of cases. There were, almost 200 of the cases were in Bucks County. But the 2 cases that stood out are the ones that I would think most listeners have seen this on TV. It's been on Anderson Cooper. It's been on UFOs Over Earth and Destination America. As a matter of fact, we're doing another Destination America show, and we're going to show the Cliff case. We showed the Denise case. But those 2 cases, what happened was Denise in Levittown, PA, on 4 instances. It's after midnight. It's, the one I remember best was it was like 4 in the morning, but she had other occurrences at 2, 3 in the morning. Every time the dog would start barking and it would wake her up, she felt like something was in the house, but she went to the back door, and she would look out the back door, and she would see this triangular craft. First was a point of light coming closer to her, and there seemed to be a second light tailing it, smaller, like an orb. And as it got closer, it was a triangular UFO with a light on each of the 3 corners. And what happened on one instance, and I think that was in May of '08, the craft was hovering and it dropped these metallic probes, sprinkles, but they were probably probes, dropped it into the tree in her backyard. And she was just astounded, and it pulled it back up into the craft, and she said it was like a magnet. I mean, there was no sound to anything. And she said it pulled the probes back up into the craft, and it left. And so what we did at the time, Bob Gardner was my investigator in the area. He cut some leaves off, and we sent it to 3 different labs. And we also cut, leaves off trees that were, around the corner, like a control sample, and other trees in the backyard. So we sent a bunch of these samples to 3 different labs. And one lab up in Massachusetts really thought they had something. It matched up with what they thought was a case that Linda Moulton Howe was involved in years ago. And but it's a funny thing. Once they completed the testing, it was this like greenish phosphorescence on the leaves, and they thought they actually had something and it matched up. But that one turned out to be bird urine. Now I didn't know birds urinate, but I guess they do. but so that one turned out to be nothing. But the other lab tests. One of them, there was 2 others. One showed that there were high levels of boron on the leaves. And that was interesting because, I looked up boron and, what do we use boron for? Boron's used in stealth fighters because it doesn't reflect radar. Now think about that. It doesn't reflect radar. So if you coated your probes in this boron and the craft, they wouldn't be able to pick you up on radar. So, and it's used in like paints and stuff for inside nuclear reactors. And when we were talking about this case, somebody said, well, boric acid is in fertilizers and sprays for trees and everything. And I then called the lab back and they said, no, if we found boric acid, we would have listed boric acid. They said we found boron, and it was at levels that were 3 to 4 times higher than they should be. So that case was really interesting with Denise, and like I said, I think everybody I know in the Philadelphia area is probably familiar with the Denise case. But then we had the Cliff case. Cliff was from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And guy, retired contractor, living in a beautiful home up there. And again, he's got the same MO as Denise. It's like 3, 4 in the morning. Dog starts barking. So it happened twice with him. The first time he's laying in bed, he looks out the window, and he sees this cloud moving, closer to his house. So he gets up to the window and he looks at it, and, it's not a cloud. It's moving too slow. And it's a 6-sided craft, huge, he said. And he saw it, and it slowly moved and went over his house, and he lost sight of it. So about a month later, it happens again. So this time he wakes the dog barks, wakes him up, same as the Denise case. And these cases are right around the same time frame also. So he wakes his wife up. They go out into the backyard, and there's a heat lightning storm. So he's looking up, and when the lightning flashes, he sees it. And the odd thing is his wife doesn't see it. She's looking around, but she's looking in a different area of the yard, doesn't see it. So he says he sees it a couple of times when the lightning flashes. And what was odd was he said it looked like 6 triangular craft docked together. He said it was really thick. As it passed, you could see the thickness of it. But when it went over his head and the heat lightning flashed, he said where the 6 were docked, you can see through the seams. So he could see the lightning lighting up as it was overhead, was blocking out the stars, but the lightning would illuminate it, and he could actually see the seams of the 6 craft. And he said it passed over and it headed to the northeast. So again, Bob Gardner was involved in this, and he goes to the airport, and they clear him and they invite him up to the tower. And this is post 9/11, it's 2008. And they said, yeah, we had a large object with no transponder come on radar, and it moved off to the northeast. And they showed it to him on radar. So the time and the date and everything matched up exactly what Cliff told us. So that was great. Now, the problem that developed after that was trying to get the radar from the FAA. I filed 4 Freedom of Information Acts. They all came back that it was beyond the 45-day record retention period. And then I found out what the rules are for record retention, and I told them, no, you got the discs there. They may not be out on the counter for 45 days, but you got them in a file cabinet below. So I actually got an email then back saying, yes, we run an efficient office, and we do have the discs. So here you got the response from the FAA saying there's nothing to be checked. It's beyond the record retention period, and but then, we find out they do have it, and they send us the discs. Now, the problem is you can't just pop the CD in and read it. You have to have the FAA's program for radar. So I send it to one of our MUFON guys in Denver, and he got it on the program, and he reads it. And it comes back that they had, I think it was 6 screens painted with objects that had no transponder on it. So, that was the proof, and it matched up to what Cliff told us. So, it was a great case. We had radar in that one. We have a controversy with the FAA. There was also, let me go back to Denise's case, the third lab that looked at it was Professor Levengood, who's a well-known name. He does a lot of this pro bono type work for ufologists. And what he did was he looked at the leaves, and the 3 labs did different types of tests. That's why they all came back with different results. But what he found on the leaves was high heat or radiation. And he said the leaves were causing somatic changes to them. They almost looked like they were fall leaves from October, November, as opposed to being, June or July when he did the analysis. So, and there were some holes in the leaves not caused by insects. So his conclusion was that the leaves were put under high heat or radiation, and that, that came from these probes. So that was really interesting. But what happened was then we were doing the UFO Hunters show with Bill Burns, and we filmed the Denise segment. So we got hers done, and we were planning to do the Cliff segment 3 weeks later. And I actually got a call from the FAA saying, yeah, you guys can come up and do the UFO Hunter shows and bring them up to the tower. So I called. I was actually driving to Philly that day when I got the phone call. So I told the producer of the UFO Hunter show, and he goes, we can't break off to run over there. That's even a different director who's doing that, Kevin Barry, and this was John Greenwald. So we couldn't break off. So and then interesting, though, is I then get a phone call on the same ride to Philly, because it's a 5-hour drive, that says the show that the FAA said that you are not to go to the Philly Tower, you're not going to have permission. Then I get a phone call right after that telling me the UFO Hunters series has been canceled by the History Channel. So it was really a weird, events that took place with that Bucks County case, but it really got the Pennsylvania MUFON going, because we did a conference at the Bucks County Community College in January of 2009, and the place seats 300, and we had 600 people show up. I mean, they were sitting on the stairs, they were standing. It was incredible, and it really got us going to where we then said, we're going to start doing these conferences, and we do 3 a year now in Bucks County, Westmoreland County, and Erie County. and our membership increased, the number of investigators increased, and that. So that was the the Bucks, the short version of the Bucks County story.
Thanks. Haven't seen many UFOs in this area. I don't think I've actually seen any, but then again, I'm not in Bucks County. But a couple of things I want to talk about here. UFO Hunters getting canceled. I did talk to Bill Burns about that when I interviewed him, and he did, for all practical purposes, say, yes, we were canceled because we were exposing a little too much information that the powers that be who control the History Channel don't want people to know about. Now, with that being said, I cannot help but be a little concerned that the same thing might happen to the upcoming second season of Hangar 1. I hate to think it would, but because of that, I do need to bring this issue to your attention. So I'm going to give you this opportunity to maybe give us a sneak peek at what is expected to come in that second season. But now that I've brought to your attention that UFO Hunters was canceled for exposing too much information, how can you prevent that from happening with Hangar 1?
Yeah. Well, I remember speaking to Bill, and he had said it was right after the Dulce, New Mexico show aired. That's when we were filming that Bucks County episode, which was, I think, second to last or third to last to air, and we never did get to do the Cliff one. So, yeah, that's a concern. It was really strange to wait. That those phone calls, the FAA, you do have permission, you don't have permission. Oh, show canceled. So now the one thing with Hangar 1, well, we already filmed season 2, so that part I know, and I can tell you, we went from 8 episodes to 12. Last year, first season, I was in all 8. I'm in 9 of the 12 for season 2. And we increased the number of people in the show from 9 to 18. So you're going to see a lot more MUFON investigators, chief investigators, state directors. You're going to see more MUFON people in the show as opposed to, other experts in the field who are not investigators. So we did 12 episodes. I would say with season 2, I think you're going to be surprised that a lot of the cases are not the high-profile stuff that it's not the Dulces, it's not the Roswells or Kecksburg. We did all of that in season 1 as far as the famous cases. So I've viewed, I think, 4 or 5 episodes already that they have done. Not done, they're rough cuts, but they wanted our input if we saw any mistakes in it, But I think it's 4 that I've seen. And, a lot of the cases are from our files, but they're not well-known cases, but they got a lot of good information to them. So that's what you're going to see in season 2 are real good cases that never got the publicity.
Thanks for the sneak peek. Another thing about UFOs that I want to talk about, I mentioned earlier the possibility that the Willow Grove Air Force Base, which is actually in Horsham, despite the name Willow Grove, might be hiding UFO technology. And some people would scoff at that idea. Stan Friedman, for example, in my interview with him, he said, well, there's no question there's a UFO ET cover-up, but I don't think the military are the ones responsible for that cover-up. And his excuse was, if the military controlled the UFOs, they would have used the UFOs in the wars. But when I spoke to John Lear and Bill Burns about that, they both said that the reason we didn't use UFO technology in the wars is because we did not have to. There was so much other less sophisticated technology, like simple airplanes and all, which would have been a lot less complicated. Just use that anyway and use humans as guinea pigs in a slaughtering war. I hate to say that, but that's what the wars basically did to us. And not only that, I do subscribe, and many do, to the idea that the wars are all manipulated. Both the same side is controlled by the same entities, and ET forces control those entities. So I could imagine for that reason they would also want to not use the UFOs in the wars. If the government tried to use it, the military tried to use it, they would say, you're not going to be using that UFO technology in the war. So the whole idea that UFOs in the military not being used in the wars because they didn't have to use them, do you agree that that's probably the case?
Yeah, I absolutely would disagree with Stanton and agree with Lear and Burns that we only bring forward what we need to as far as our black ops, our black projects, our military goes. You got to remember, the stealth fighter was 1976 technology that we brought out in 1988. So, and that is still state of the art, even though, the Chinese made their own stealth fighter. I'm not sure we've actually seen it flown. It's almost like the aircraft carriers that they have. I'm not sure that they're really as sophisticated. They look like it, but who knows what electronics it has. So, if the stealth fighter was what we brought out, and that's like light years ahead of anybody else's military, and that was 1976 technology. And this is what I tried to tell Anderson Cooper 2 years ago when I was on his show, that, you can only imagine what we have right now, and you're not going to bring it out. You would bring it out if there was a all-out war against, if China and Russia banded together, and tried to attack us, we would bring out the big guns. But you're not bringing that stuff out for Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. We could beat them. We could beat them with one aircraft carrier, could beat those countries. So you're not bringing your big stuff out unless you're in a big war. So now the thing with Willow Grove is, we tried to get an interview with Willow Grove. Matter of fact, the sound guy from UFO Hunters, when we were filming the Denise episode, his uncle worked or was enlisted there at Willow Grove, and he says, let me call my uncle and I'll see if we can get an interview, which was great, but they turned us down. They said they were not going to give us any interviews, and they had nothing to talk about regarding the cases in 2008. But that doesn't negate the fact that they could be using some next generation, craft there that are not extraterrestrial, just stuff that we developed. There's rumors of the TR-3B, which is that triangular craft with three lights on it. And I kind of wonder if that's not what Denise saw. It was either extraterrestrial or it was the TR-3B. I didn't know about the TR-3B back in 2008. I don't think I found out about that until 2010. But we've got three cases in particular right now that I think are three of the best cases out there. And they haven't received any publicity. One was in the MUFON Journal, I think 2 months ago, was the cover story. But that case was case 47,000. And if you were a MUFON member, you could then go to, MUFON.com, CMS, tracking, look up that case 47,000, and you can see what's written there. But 47,000 was an interesting case. It's over again in that eastern side bayou, eastern part of Pennsylvania. We've got people seeing and video. They see these orbs in the sky, high up in the sky. There's usually 10, 12 of these things. They're just like these white lights, or they could be orange lights. They see them high in the sky, but there's a bunch of them. It's not just one or two, so it's not Venus. But what happened, with this case was, so we got the witness seeing this, and it was really just a simple case. It was just lights in the sky, and the investigator on it had requested radar, but he didn't go to the FAA. He went to the military, to the Air Force, and they gave us some radar on that. And when we looked at the radar, it showed an area that had these objects with no transponders. It covered a 150 by 900 foot area in the sky. There was multiple craft in that area, there wasn't one craft that was 900 by 150. So, but the weird thing that shows up is it shows, when you look at each of the screens, it shows a plane, an airplane, a small plane, coming into the screen, heading right at them, and then abruptly making a left turn to avoid them. So what we're trying to do now is locate that pilot and ask him. That one would have been out of Allentown Airport, was where that plane landed. So we're trying to find this pilot and say, well, what did you see? because we know we got you on radar, and all of a sudden you make this. I don't know how sharp a plane can make a left turn. It wasn't 90 degrees, or it wouldn't be a Cessna. So it made a very sharp left turn to avoid what was in the sky. So that's a great case we got right now. We got one in Harrisburg. And what the weird thing is? You can look at the video on all three of these cases I'm telling you about. They all look the same. If you shut the volume off of the person screaming, "Oh my God, look at that," whole, cursing and everything else that they do when they see something they can't explain. If you muted it and just looked at the video, they all look the same. So the second case was in Harrisburg. Same thing. Multiple objects in the sky, high up. There's like a dozen of them. And on the second instance, there was a Monday. I think it was in August of this year. And then on Friday, it happens again. So they call the police. And two police officers come by, and they get out of the car, and they stood there for a half hour with all the other witnesses looking up at the sky at these things. And the one officer says to the other, "Those are UFOs." So there's a real good case with multiple witnesses and two police officers. And then probably the best one of them all, in the northern part of Delaware, the state of Delaware, because that's my area also, we get, again, a video showing these lights high up in the sky. And so they video it. The guy turns his camera off because it was there for a long period of time. It was there for 45 minutes, So he puts his camera away, and all of a sudden the lights start to take off one at a time, boom, boom, boom. But one kind of like stays behind. It's not going anywhere. All of a sudden it discharges something on fire, and then it's able to go. So this thing comes down, and it's on fire, and we recover it. So now we have some debris from a UFO. So I don't know if this is, again, you don't know if this is our next generation stuff or an extraterrestrial craft, but this thing comes down on fire. It hits the ground. The flames are about 3 feet high. It's about waist height on fire, and it's actually on the neighbor's property. So the guy goes over and he says he puts the fire out, and then he takes it and he puts it on his porch, and he notifies us. And so now it's rained and other things have happened, so it wasn't completely segregated. But so we take it and we send it to Frontier Labs, which was one of the labs that did the Denise analysis. So we sent it to Frontier Labs. Phyllis Buttinger, who's a name that people would recognize, does the analysis on it. Her initial email to me was, "John, there's a chemical on this that I can't identify. It's not showing up." She goes, "This could be much bigger than the Bucks County case." So we're saying, holy cow, we got something that's not in the periodic table, So then we're waiting, and we're putting our case together and stuff. And so then she comes back with her final report, and she says that, we knew it looked like insulation. That's what it looked like. And she goes, it's some form of insulation, but it is coated with a chemical that she couldn't identify initially, but then she was able to identify it. I don't recall the name of the acid, for example, that it is, but she says it's for waterproofing. And so she did some research on insulation that's waterproofed. And she says we only developed this about 18 months ago. And she goes, it would really be strange that we're already using it, if commercially, if those are our planes up there or whatever the object was. So we got a piece of insulation that's used in what she said is an energy storage area. It had caught fire. And it was waterproofed, and whatever it was, they discharged it from the craft, and then the craft took off. So, like I said, those are three really good cases, all really two of the three on the eastern side of the state. And so I don't know if Willow Grove is in the middle of this, or those ours, or those theirs, but they're all really interesting and good cases that we're working on.
And keep working on them. Let's switch gears for a little bit. Since you've written a couple of novels about 2012, I think I'll bring this subject up in conversation. Many people ask, okay, so what did happen on 2012, and specifically the date? Well, there's three different people that I can think of that have given different but understandably possibly true explanations. First of all, Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis said December 21st, 2012, that was the first time in history, and he says that this is actually happening every equinox and solstice and eclipse, where we all got to experience a period of universal dream time. Our consciousness essence got to, even though we weren't consciously aware of it, our subconscious, our soul essence managed to experience universal dream time, where we basically decided, are we going to be truth seekers or are we going to be sheeple? Another person, Andromeda Council contactee Tolek, said that was the day that the core of the Earth, from the galactic alignment, the core of the Earth blossomed into a fourth dimensional core, and over the course of time, Earth will ascend into higher consciousness. And Jim Self, in an interview on In5D Radio, said that that was the day that everyone is free. What he means is time ceased to exist on that day, in the sense that it doesn't matter what you do, the end result of the timeline that we're on will be the same. And people are saying we're on a positive timeline, so only good things are going to happen in the future. So this, in a sense, is all consciousness related, and many people assert that, yes, the Mayan calendar, it was about consciousness. But you've written novels about this, novel being fiction, but many would say novels are fiction, truth under the guise of fiction. I have not read these novels, but I was a big 2012 fan during that time. And what do you have to tell us about the subject of 2012 and the Mayan calendar end date?
Yeah, well, if we ascended into another level of higher consciousness, well, then it missed Ferguson, it missed Afghanistan, it missed all the Muslim countries. We didn't ascend to anything. We are still the same violent people we were in 2010, 2011, 2012. Nothing has changed. So I don't think that that's what 2012 was about. But let me tell you this first. I will give you my opinion on what was important about 2012. I just want to first say 2012 was the reason I got involved in UFOs. Now, if you ask most ufologists or MUFON investigators, they're going to tell you that they were big UFO fans since they were 10, 12 years old. Well, I wasn't. I didn't get involved in UFOs till I was 39 years old. I mean, I was more of I collected famous monsters of filmland. I watched every black and white, Universal horror movie from the 1950s. And, I went to Comic-Cons, and I would build models and paint them and then collect resin ones when I had more money and could afford them. But I was not a UFO person. But what happened was, in the book I wrote, 12/21/2012, A Prophecy, I did a lot of research, because that book I started in 96 and didn't publish it for 11 years later. I published it in 07. But, I'd never written a book before. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And but I put a lot of time into researching it and coming up with a lot of the different theories and the storyline. But what happened was, all these other cultures I came across, because I was trying to find out other end-time prophecies, like what do the Chinese say, what do the Europeans say, what does the Catholics say, what do people say? And I came across all these different cultures, and what came clear to me was that they had encounters with extraterrestrials. They talked about people from the stars, people on flying shields, sky people. They didn't know what to call them. They didn't call them extraterrestrials. So that, as I was researching it, I said to myself, I got to look into this UFO thing. It was the mid-'90s. I had been watching that show Sightings, which was one of my favorites on television. I think it was one of the first shows on Fox TV when Fox came out, was Sightings. And I remember on Sightings that they would always, when they had the segment on UFOs, there'd be a MUFON investigator. And I always said to myself, if I get time, I'm going to join this MUFON, whatever it is, and become an investigator. So that's really how I got started. I got divorced, so I had my free time. And I joined MUFON. I wrote my novels. But that's what got me into ufology. Now, as far as 2012 goes, to me, the important thing about 2012 is, how did the Mayans figure out the procession that the planet was on. And, I haven't looked at this 2012 stuff, obviously, in 3 years, but I think it was, every 2,600 years, there was an exact number of years that it takes for the planet to, it kind of wobbles, the rotation changes.
26,000.
Yeah, it changes 1 degree every 72 years. And think about that. So the sky you're looking at changes 1 degree every 72 years. How could any primitive culture from 1,000 years ago figure that out? I mean, 72 years is one person's lifetime. The sky is 1 degree different. Why would you even think to look at something like that? It makes no sense. But they were able to exactly figure out the wobble of the planet. So, I think we all know the sky over Egypt was different than the sky we see today because it lined up, the Great Pyramids lined up with the 3 stars. I can't remember which stars. Orion, I think it was. That's what they were looking at. So then after all those years, 1,000 years, you're not looking at Orion anymore. You're looking at, some other star system. And when we look up in the sky, 1,000 years from now, you're not going to see the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. They're going to be somewhere else because of the wobble. So the important thing for me was, how did the Mayans know that? They went from being these Stone Age people to all of a sudden building expansion bridges across, rivers, doing dentistry and some limited brain surgery, and they developed some really sophisticated astronomy and math out of nowhere. So somebody gave them that knowledge, and what they said was Coco Khan, who was a Caucasian male with an elongated skull, blue eyes. I think they said blonde hair, blue eyes, elongated skull. He just came walking out of the ocean one day on the shores there, and he gave them all of this knowledge. So some sophisticated person or extraterrestrial washed up on their shores and was able to give them all of this knowledge, which turned out in 1000 A.D. to be exactly correct. So in my mind, that's the important part of 2012. And they said that he was from the stars. And so I think this was a Nordic, extraterrestrial who's probably part of our whole DNA story. Our evolution probably ties to those Nordics. And that's what, one of my books is about, the most recent one. But to me, that was the important thing about the Mayans in 2012. They were given this knowledge, just like the tribe in Mali. It was given the knowledge of that 3-star system where one's a dwarf star and the other star you can't even see, the Dogon tribe. These people were given knowledge. When you look at Egypt, okay, Casey says those pyramids are 10,500 years old. Our archaeologists say they're 4,600 years old. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, why were the oldest pyramids built perfect? They were made perfect. And then the ones after that, built by us, clearly built by humans, were extremely imperfect, falling apart. Right angles didn't add up. Think about it. How could the oldest pyramids that were built in Egypt be perfect, but yet the ones after that are not perfect? It should be the other way around. You build up to perfection. You don't make perfect and then get worse. So that's my spin on 2012.
Thanks. And let's take a spin on something else, the whole subject of Apophis, because you wrote a novel, Apophis 2029. I'm just going to briefly summarize this for those that aren't familiar with this. The story goes that an asteroid called Apophis, which is about as big as a football stadium, is supposed to come by the Earth on Friday the 13th on I don't know the month, but Friday the 13th in the year 2029 in some months. And if it passes through a keyhole area, where if it passes through that in, I think 2036 on some, I don't know the exact date. I think one source said it would actually be on a Friday the 13th in 2036,
April.
but others haven't.
It's okay. April 13th. Yeah.
Well, in 2029, is that April 13th, or is in 2036, is that April 13th?
No, it is every time. So every 7 years, it comes by on April 13th. Well, that it's a Friday. Obviously, it's not a Friday every time. But you know what? You're right. I might have to pull the calendar out and double check that because it may not be a Friday each time.
Okay, but the thing about Apophis that I have a feeling that this is going to be in this time period of 2029 when it comes. This might be spun into some sort of fear-mongering thing because we actually don't have to worry about this. I mean, anybody who saw the Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura episode might remember John Hutchinson talking about how they have death ray technology which can dustify an asteroid if they wanted to, and John Lear, in my interview with him, talked about how they have direct energy weapon death ray technology in Earth's orbit, and he actually asserts that is the direct energy weapon that justified the Twin Towers on 9/11. But the point here is people say, well, you wouldn't have to worry about asteroids hitting Earth because they could justify it if they wanted to. And not only that, they say if you blow up an asteroid, it's the worst thing you can do because the pieces of the asteroid will all shower down on the planet, many different locations. But other people have said, well, yeah, but if you have many years in advance, you can blow it up, and then over the course of time, the pieces will dissipate and you won't have to worry about it. So that kind of makes you wonder, why won't the government just use direct energy technology to justify Apophis or maybe blow it up many years before it's supposed to hit the Earth? I mean, could you perhaps answer those questions for us?
Yeah. Well, it comes by every 7 years. So actually it comes by April of 2015. So in 5 months, we're going to hear a little bit about Apophis. It'll pass by. Then in 2022, 2029, and well, the thing with 2029 is when it comes close enough that it actually dips, it'll pass below our satellites. Now, you may have gone out at night and actually seen a satellite. When it comes by, it's going to be lower than the satellites. Well, it should light up the sky as it passes by, but it hits that window where gravity can pull it in. Not pull it into the planet, but change its trajectory. So the concern then is when it comes back in 36, does it hit us or completely miss us on the opposite side of the planet because it's been changed so much? So what I wanted to do, when I learned about Apophis, I kind of enjoyed writing the 2012 books. So I said, all right, I got to write another book now. And obviously Apophis 2029 is fiction, but what I put in there, is 90% true. Just like, the stuff I put in 2012, you can't prove any of this stuff. So it's fiction, but it's mostly true. So I jumped on the, I wanted to write the 2029 book before anybody else did. Because actually, when I wrote the 2012 book in 2007 and published it, I was the fourth book on Amazon dealing with 2012. And then as it got closer, when you hit 2009, 2010, all of a sudden there's like 200 books on 2012 out there. So I figured I'm going to really jump the gun and write this book 20 years in advance, or 25 years in advance. And so I wrote this book, Apophis 2029. And, it's interesting. What I found, the initial, I like the first analysis that's done, When they tell you saccharin will cause cancer, I believe that one. I don't believe when the saccharin people, commission somebody to do another study that says, no, it doesn't. When cell phones come back and they say it causes brain tumors, I believe that report. I don't believe the report from Motorola that's paid for and says, no, it doesn't. So I always try to listen to the first report. So the first report on Apophis said, I believe it was a 3% chance of hitting, but it's definitely going to pass beneath our satellites. That's how close it's going to pass by. So all it really needs to do is hit a golf ball sized pebble out in space, and its trajectory will change by a hair, and then it goes from 3% to 99% chance of hitting. So that's what got my interest. And what they did afterwards was JPL. They did a second study, and they said, chances went from 3% to 1 in 254,000. no, million, no, 254,000, 1 in 254,000. So you went from 3% to 0.000003. I don't believe that. So that was book number 3 that of the 5 that I've written. So obviously, I try to describe what's going to happen. I'm trying to describe the planet in 2029. And there's so many interesting theories in that book. I think personally it's my best written book as far as the whole storyline and the characters in it and everything that's in this book. I really think that one is probably my best storyline. But, I try to predict the world in 2029, and I've got the United States no longer exists. It's no longer the United States of America. It's called the United States of 63. And what happens is 13, like the original 13 colonies, 13 English-speaking countries join the U.S. as 13 states. I think it's actually 6 countries, 13 states. For example, Great Britain joins as 4 states. And I was watching the whole thing with Scotland just a couple of months ago saying, this is amazing. If Scotland were to break off from Great Britain, it's no longer the United Kingdom. It becomes, separate countries. What's the odds by 2029 that they then join the United States? Maybe England, mainland England, joins the United States, followed by, Ireland and Wales and Scotland. And I've got what I was talking about in my book, So in the book, it's, Great Britain is 4 countries. I think Canada joins as 6. You got Australia. I can't remember if it was South Africa, but we ended up going to 13 additional states. So we become a global country, rather than just North America. And actually, a lot of things that I put in the book have come true. I wrote the story, and in it I've got there's characters in the story, but I've got the character watching a show called Switched at Birth. And I wrote that and published it prior to the TV show coming on ABC called Switched at Birth. So that was some of my friends have called me and said, "You realize that 3, 4, 5 of these things that you talk about already have happened?" I said, "Well, that's interesting." So I don't know if the asteroid's actually going to hit, but I think it's an excellent story. But what I did in it was, I have the asteroid hitting. And then, it's a good end time story, a lot of action, different characters. I think it's 3 or 4 storylines at the same time that you're following, totally different people and stuff. You've got these FBI agents almost like Mulder and Scully, doing one thing. You've got these characters, which was actually myself and my kids. They have different names in the story, but it's us trying to survive what's going on. So it's a really good story. But at the end, after all this destruction, they find a UFO intact that was buried and is now exposed. And it's found up in Greenland. And I don't want to say any more of the storyline, but when you read the last chapter or the last 2 chapters, it will blow you away. I think it's probably one of the best endings to a story you could possibly come across. But I'm not going to tell you what's said or what happens when they find this UFO, but it has a UFO ending to the story.
All right, people have to read it for themselves. And by the way, you can't rule out the possibility that some asteroids and or comets, maybe possibly Apophis, are actually extraterrestrial craft masquerading as comets or asteroids. It has been said by some that the largest asteroid, Cirrus, and also the recent comet Ison, were actually extraterrestrial craft masquerading as asteroids and comets. But maybe that'll come in conversation later. But I do want to talk about some things that are specific to Hangar 1, the episodes here, Presidential Encounters. In my interview with John Lear, he talked about how if the Greys were making some sort of a treaty with the government. Well, first of all, Laura Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower's great-granddaughter who I had on my show, she has said that the treaty that was made between Eisenhower and the Greys, which people like Alfred Weber have said are the Greys from Orion, which are malevolent Greys, they actually would not have been able to do the treaty. Well, first of all, Laura Eisenhower said that treaty was in the works since the time of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his presidency, but it was only during the time of Eisenhower when it truly became official. And all the UFO sightings that were seen over D.C. in the 50s, that was no accident. That was a consequence to the Orion Greys signing a treaty. But John Lear has said the Greys, they would not be they're basically plants and robots combined. They basically just take orders without any emotion, do what their masters tell them to do. So it would have been some other extraterrestrial race making a treaty with Eisenhower and his men. Some have asserted that it was reptilian aliens, but the issue that here is a little bit of a conflict over whether or not these Greys could have been working for someone, or what some say there are Grey species that are intelligent enough to do things themselves and are not like biological plant-like robots, as they assert. So this whole thing about presidential encounters and UFOs, specifically the Eisenhower thing, do you think maybe it was in the works since the time of FDR, and do you think that the Greys that signed the treaty were doing it themselves, or they had another extraterrestrial race giving them orders?
You know, 5 years or so ago, you know, if you told me Eisenhower signed this, I think it was called the Greada Treaty with these extraterrestrials, and I would have rolled my eyes and said, "Get out of here! What are you, nuts?" But you know, as I've learned more in this field. And that's the weird thing about UFOs is there's so much information and there's so many really good documents out there. This is the best documented phenomenon that's considered not real, you know, that's out there, and there's so much information. So I you know, this up until just a couple of years ago, I didn't believe the whole Eisenhower MJ-12. I didn't believe that whole story. But as you start to understand it more, and you say, well, is it possible, would this happen? The answer is yes. Well, what would happen if this species showed up and they said, hey, United States, you can sign a treaty with us. We're going to pass on some technology to you. We got some things we got to do so you don't interfere. Yes or no? But if you say no, we go to the Soviet Union and make the same offer. You know, it's almost like free agency, you know. Tigers offered $144 million to Max Scherzer. You know, he might try to get $150 from the Red Sox. You know, that's the way it goes. So what would we do? You know, we would say we don't want to, but we need to, because if you join forces with Russia, we're dead in the water, you know. So I can see that scenario happening because that's why it's above top secret, and it is the most important phenomenon, the most important thing in the world right now is this UFO treaty, the technology that you can get from it. There's nothing more important than keeping this quiet. And think about, you know, all the Freedom of Information Acts done by Stanton Friedman, you know, Nick Redfern, all these guys. All of this stuff comes back whited out or blacked out. Well, you know, why the secrecy for something that's not real? It doesn't make any sense. And when you look at the whole phenomenon, it becomes very clear that any open discussion of UFOs, if the government did bring out their files that aren't subject to FOIA, that they're still hiding from us, what is in these files that they threaten national security? And that's basically what we're told. You know, they black this stuff out because of national security. So what's in these files that could be so important that it would threaten national security? So you could see these scenarios actually happening. You know, I think about, I think that stuff did happen in the 50s. I'm not sure that we did sign that. You know, the word was that we didn't sign it, and then maybe we signed it the following year. You know, at Palm Springs, we didn't sign it. We did sign it in New Mexico when there was an agreement there. But here's something you got to understand, too, and I put this in my book, An Alternative History of Mankind, is there are multiple species here. You know, when the average person talks about UFOs and ETs, they think there's one. There's, you know, ET, phone home, that's what he looks like, that's what they are. Well, there's not. There's multiple species here. You know, I agree with Lear and other people who say that the Greys are, I call them an android. I think they're part machine, part alive. I think they take orders. They're robotic. They're part alive. They're probably controlled with some sort of telepathy or some chip in their head that just, and some guy is sitting, with his Xbox controlling them, the alien Xbox. But I definitely think that the Greys are not a species of themselves. I think that they are controlled. And, in the original Hangar 1 on Eisenhower, I can't remember. The one we shot as the trailer, that was the first one we filmed, and we showed it to History, and that sold them on the show. In that series, we had some tall whites. They with the long white hair, like 7 feet tall. They stepped out of the shadows to shake Eisenhower's hand, and he shook his head no and kind of backed up, and they backed away. That was what we had shown in the trailer. I can't remember if season 1, I don't think we showed that in season 1. I don't think they showed those extraterrestrials, but those were what was originally planned, with the tall whites, the real pale with the long shoulder length, straight white hair. Was what they were going to show was the species. But like I said, there's multiple species out there. And, one of the other things, I'm coming to the conclusion right now, and I put this in my book. I think we were invaded in the late 1970s. When you look at the information, right? So you start saying, okay, the 60s we had, the UFOs over the power stations, and we had the blackouts. So, but I don't think they were trying to disable us. I think those were just refueling. I think they needed the energy from the power lines and the transformers to refuel. But what happened in the 70s, in particular 1973, you have that UFO wave across Pennsylvania, started in Pascagoula, Mississippi. It went up the Mississippi, it went across Pennsylvania, and up the coast of New Hampshire. If you think about it, was really 2 months. October 17th of 73 was a day that should live in infamy. There were more human abductions and sightings on that day, or those 3 days, the 17th, 18th, 19th, than any other time period in our history. And they were seen taking soil samples, taking animal samples, abducting people. They had some sort of a suit on, an outfit. They kind of looked like the Michelin Man. They had that bulky type spacesuit that they were wearing. But they were clearly here on a 6 to 8 week mission to take as many samples. This was a new species that showed up in September of 73. They came, they took samples, they went up the Mississippi, they went across Pennsylvania. They took all kinds of soil, human, animal samples, and they were gone. So think about, what would happen if a species showed up, based themselves on the dark side of the moon? They said, okay, we got to go in. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to send a team down. You're going to get samples of everything and come back. And they did that, But what follows after all of that is, in the late 70s, it's the following year, really. That's 73. 74 and 75, you have all of these cattle mutilations. So in 75, I think, was the peak with 10,000 cattle mutations. So it's like, okay, they came in, they took their samples, then they got a little more serious, and they're doing this cattle mutilation thing, and they're trying to figure out our species or figure out a virus or do something, or maybe they were creating a hybrid and they were using the cattle because of the size of it to carry some hybrid creature, and the cattle would carry it. I don't know what they were doing, but then you had that, so it kind of progresses, and then the whole human abduction thing kind of takes off also around that same time. So, trying to reason through it, but it seems to me that that somewhere in the late 70s, a species, showed up in 73, 74, 75. They were doing what they were doing, and, they did whatever they planned to do, they did. And it probably happened in 79 or 80, whether they put hybrids here or whatever they were doing. It's a silent invasion, but I definitely think that we were somehow compromised or invaded in the late 70s. That's just my opinion. But, that stuff's in my book, An Alternative History of Mankind.
Thanks for giving your take on that. I want to switch gears now. Related subject of the alien technology that they use. Stanton Friedman and his colleague Kathleen Marden, I believe her name is, I'm going to have her on my show, talked about how they believe that ETs are using magneto-hydraulic propulsion to get from point A to point B in space. Problem with that is it's not faster than light or exploit the speed of light, so it would pretty much only be good for short distances in our star system vicinity. John Lear, in my interview with him, he talked about how Stanton Friedman has it all wrong in regards to what he thinks about Bob Lazar's element 115 materials. John Lear asserts that when Stanton says that element 115, it has too short a half-life, so it would decay in a heartbeat before the ETs could do anything with it, so it's useless. John said, no, the element 115 that Bob Lazar was talking about comes from a solar system much bigger than ours, and it's an isotope, a special isotope that comes from a very big solar system, and because the solar system is much larger, that allows for the atom to be more stable, so that allows for it to not decay in a heartbeat. And you know what John Lear also said? He said, Stanton's always saying he's a nuclear physicist, but he's never had a job in nuclear physics. He's got a degree, and I think, well, even if that is true, I mean, it was kind of sad that John would attack Stanton like that. But anyway, the point is, element 115, if what John Lear says is right, it is genuine, and it can be used to exploit the speed of light problem. You can get from here to Zeta Reticuli, which is about 39 light years, in a little over 30 hours, John said. And then John Lear also said that, hey, you can also travel great distances by using the quantum entanglement thing. Like the reason quantum entanglement works, Einstein called it spook action at a distance. Atoms at opposite end of the universe are intertwined, so they'll vibrate at the same time. If you vibrate one, the reason that's possible is because space and time are actually illusions, and some ETs have technology that can exploit that, and of course people have talked about how they use wormholes and all. So in regards to alien technology, do you think Stanton is right about magneto-hydraulic propulsion? Do you think Bob Lazar is right about element 115? And can you also assert, they're probably using the technology that can exploit space and time?
Well, I think it was about 15 years after Lazar, they did discover element 115. It is part of the periodic table now, and the way he described it is what element 115 is. So although Lazar falsified his education, or it was changed, I don't know which actually happened there. I think a lot of people probably lied on their resumes to get jobs because you wanted to get a job, and you were hoping that, they didn't do a real background check. But so there's some truth to what Lazar says. One of the things I wonder about, and I put that in my book, is, the interesting thing, you talk about the speed of light, but gravity can bend light. We proved that, right? Einstein proved that. So maybe gravity is actually more powerful than the speed of light. And I think whatever they're using to travel has something to do with dark matter, because the universe, I think, is 3% matter and 97% dark matter. And, we can't even explain what gravity is. We don't really know what it is. It's not centrifugal force. They still don't really know what gravity is. So, and they certainly don't know what dark matter is, and that's 97% of what's out there. So, so I think obviously the answers are there. Our science is so primitive. Our science is, 50 years old, as far as being any sort of modern science. And, we're very primitive. We don't have the answers. We pretend we do, because any theory that scientists come up with, and I don't care if it's biologists, physicists, I don't care who they are, when they come up with their theory and it's approved, that's the theory. And you can't get them to change that for 10, 15 years. Then all of a sudden they change it. It becomes, we got a better theory now. So how correct were they the first time? You can't get them to change it, though, until years later, because you have to build your career on this theory, and there's a lot of funding involved in the scientific field, and I'm skeptical really of the scientists, of the scientific method of our science. I think it's driven by funding, careers, titles. You're into this, and now you can get all this funding. And what do we actually cure and prove? Very little. There's billions and billions of dollars spent every year in these grants, but what did they prove? Take the medical field. We cured polio. What was that, 50 years ago? We came up with a cure for smallpox. That's it. That's basically it as far as diseases go, or plagues. We don't have a cure for anything else. There's no cure for diabetes, $136 billion a year spent in maintenance on it. And, the same thing for cancer and all, Parkinson's, all these other $100 billion diseases that we have that pays for the medical field and the pharmaceuticals. There's no cure for this stuff. Why not? Because, when you fund something and you actually, come up with a cure, that means end of job, end of funding, end of career. So I'm very skeptical. And I have this argument with, people within MUFON, people on the outside, people on Facebook who believe that, the scientific method is everything. It's taken us out of the dark ages. And I'm thinking out of the box, that our scientific method may be the reason we can't prove this stuff. Either we're too primitive, or, saying that if something happens one time and you can't repeat it and verify it, it didn't happen. That's basically what we say. So that's not correct. But, we're a long ways off. It probably has something to do with dark energy or being able to bend space, et cetera. But, we've only been modern for 50 years, basically. I really think since 1990 or so, when computers came in 85, how long we've been modern? 30 years max? And, I think our kids and everything have really great time coming up ahead of us, with what's going to happen in the future with technology. But we're a long ways off, and I don't put a whole lot of faith in science and their theories. You can punch holes in so many of the theories. Evolution, it's a theory, it's a philosophy. Show me all the proof for evolution. Show me the fossil records that show a dinosaur turning into a bird. Show me the halfway point where the thing is growing wings. It's not there. None of it's there. Show me Cro-Magnon. How does this Cro-Magnon guy, taller than us, larger brain, show up at about 30,000 BC and then disappear around 10 or 12,000 BC? How does he show up after us? That's not evolution. It doesn't add up. But you try to tell these people that this isn't correct, and they will fight you. They get so hostile with you, when you do these emails on Facebook or whatever, and it's like I said, holy Moses, if this guy had a gun, he'd shoot me because I'm saying something. I got into another argument with a psychiatrist. I'm telling him that these alien abductions are evil. They are not here to help us. How do you look at a kidnapping and a rape as a positive experience? And he's like getting unbelievable, saying, why should you be allowed to say that? I said, what are you talking about, be allowed to say that? And that's what it is. This is not a positive experience. We went back and forth. It was actually Kathy Martin stepped in and put an end to this email trail that was going on. And she told the guy to apologize to me. But, some of the things that happen, like I said, I don't think we're anywhere near having the science that can prove this stuff, and I'm really skeptical of money and funding. These things will be dragged out forever to make a person's career because they're making $150,000, $200,000 a year, and they don't want to really cure it because then funding ends.
Well, money does make to make a difference. It's a shame that it controls the world in so many ways.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yes, but I want to move on here. Area 51, in my interview with Bill Burns, he asserts that exotic technology has completely been moved out of Area 51, although we didn't really get into how he can confirm that. And Andrew Bartz, this Akashic Records reader, said, yeah, there is ET material and UFO material at Area 51, but he also said that there is time travel technology at Area 51. If anybody wants to learn about government time travel technology, listen to my interview with Andrew Bashago. But Area 51, in regards to the technology that's there, and is Bill Burns right about no exotic technology being there? They've moved it to other locations so they can keep the ET cover up. What do you have to say about this?
Well, Area 51 is where we do our, it's probably some back engineering, but really our next black project, our advanced, aircraft. The ET stuff was taken to Wright-Patterson in Cincinnati, is where that stuff was taken initially. That's where it all went to be analyzed. I think the stuff they found out from that were then brought to Area 51, and really that S4, which is 15 miles southwest of Area 51, is where, again, some of that ET stuff. But I think that actually what Area 51 is where we developed that next generation. It was the U-2, it was the SR-71, it's the stealth aircraft, it's the TR-3B, and whatever else we're working on. I think when they figure this stuff out, from Wright-Patterson and S4, they go to Area 51 and they have the big landing strip, and that's where we create the next generation craft that we're not going to tell anybody about until, it's World War III. So I think that's what happens. And I had heard, I don't know how long ago this was, 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, that that stuff was all moved, and it was moved to Colorado, to an area there where they did biological and that type of radiation biological testing. So there's a location there where they're in a mountain, but the area outside it, you don't need a fence because there was a lot of biological and radiation testing, and that whole area is basically contaminated, so the public's not allowed there. And if you did go there, you're probably not going to last very long. So they fly in because the whole area is really contaminated, and but they're in a mountain there, and that's where this stuff is being done because, you don't need a fence because this area will kill you just by going in it. That's what I had heard.
Yeah, don't bother trying to file a Freedom of Information Act to find out who the installation commander it is at Area 51. The sign says no entrance without permission from the installation commander. In the Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura episode, some guy who lived in Rachel, Nevada, said if you try to file a Freedom of Information Act for that, it will just come back blank. But moving on to the other subjects here. Let's see which episode of Hangar 1 we can discuss for a moment. Okay, space weapons. I did mention this briefly earlier. John Lear and also John Hutchinson in that other Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Venture episode about the death ray talked about how the a direct energy weapon death ray they are up in Earth's orbit on space-based platforms, and again John Lear asserts that was the direct energy weapon that dustified the Twin Towers on 9/11. Some debate it was another direct energy weapon, but that kind of a space weapon I'd like to talk about. And also speaking of 9/11, in my interview with Alfred Weber, he said the planes were actually holograms, and the one that hit the South Tower was a UFO that had a holographic mask around it. He said the bulge on the bottom of the plane is evidence that it was a hologram of a UFO with a hologram of a plane around, and that bulge was the UFO kind of jutting out, if you will. So let's talk about this for a moment. Space weapons, direct energy rays, and also UFOs. Maybe they're not weapons, but UFOs with the ability to put holograms of planes or whatever around them. What do you have to say about those subjects?
Well, I think 9/11 happened, with the airplanes that were hijacked. I think the one that over Flight 93, I think we shot that one down. I think there was advanced knowledge that this was going to happen because, Building 7 was clearly a controlled detonation, and the towers may have been brought down as controlled detonations also, So I think there was some knowledge there that this was coming, and there was something in Building 7 that they didn't want, they needed destroyed, because they took that building down. And, I kind of surmised, and it's in my book, An Alternative History of Mankind, maybe some of the evidence there was kept in that building. So when this went down, whether it was the UFO evidence, the JFK evidence, whatever was there, they needed to take that building down. So that was a controlled detonation, in my opinion. So I don't think it was spontaneous. I think there was knowledge weeks and months before that this was coming, and for whatever reason, it's almost like the kind of false flag or attack that you kind of hope for, so you can get your military stuff going. But I think it happened as it happened. I don't think that the planes are UFOs. I tell you one thing. Another conclusion I've come to, though, is I'm thinking these black helicopters with the cattle mutilations and that type of stuff. Some people say there are military or there are some paramilitary, but what my thinking is these extraterrestrials are not stupid. So why show up in a circular craft that hovers and flies crazy speeds and angles and stuff? So what you do is then you create your own helicopter. You blacken the windows and everything. They're flown by extraterrestrials. They have our technology of propellers and everything. So you have an ET helicopter that fits right in, except it doesn't have the numbers on the back to identify the craft, etc. And so I'm thinking they've infiltrated a little bit by just duplicating our technology as far as helicopters go, and if they were the ones that flew into the towers, and I don't think they were, they would have taken a plane and made an exact model of one of our planes, and nobody, you'd be able to fly in the sky, and nobody would question it unless until they say, well, you don't have a transponder and that type of information. But you got to think like they do, or think like you're invading China. What would you do? Well, you'd want to fit in. You'd want to have your planes look like theirs. You'd want to the whole false flag. Wasn't that back in the 1600s where I think it was a British ship put the flag up of another of their enemy so they could pull right up, and then change flags and open fire on them. That's how false flag. That's what it meant. So why wouldn't these ETs then just duplicate our planes, our helicopters, but it's them flying it? And I think that's what's happening with cattle mutilations.
A lot of stuff on the cattle mutilation issue that is worth discussing in my interview with Linda Moulton Howe. When I'll have her on, that'll definitely come up in conversation. Just want to give my listeners a sneak peek at that. But actually, I don't think you discussed. Sorry, I got you diverted on 9/11 for a moment. I really wanted to talk about the whole subject of space-based death rays and all, because one of the episodes of Hangar 1 was space weapons. Can you maybe confirm from your research that people like John Lear and John Hutchinson are right, that there are death rays and other space weapons up in Earth's orbit?
Well, I think absolutely. I think our government has that stuff. When you talk to, I think it was Jan Harzan, the guy who's the head of MUFON right now, had that conversation with what's his name now, the guy that was the head of Skunk Works before he passed away, and he specifically said that we've been to the stars. Anything you can think of, we already have, but it would take an act of God to get that released for the good of the, general public. So, I think that it's like a big shell game, and people get mad at me when I say this, but I say NASA and SETI, those are just placebos. That's not what's really going on. And and I'll give you an example. I'm reading Major Kehoe's book from 1973, and I had heard of this Project Ozma. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but what they had done was they wanted to search for signals, right? So they got this one guy, and the second guy in charge was Frank Drake. So whatever they did, they targeted the Tau Ceti, solar system, and they got signals and they made contact. They immediately shut down Project Ozma. They moved it to Puerto Rico, Arecibo, Puerto Rico, under Air Force control, right? So then what they did to keep Frank Drake quiet was, Frank, Congress is going to fund a program called SETI. You're going to now move from here to over there. You're going to be the guy who runs SETI, and it's really a placebo. You're going to have everybody looking over here, but we're doing the real work out of Arecibo with these signals and who knows what else, because that was 40 years ago that this all took place. SETI is a placebo. So then I tell people, well, all of you that hook your laptops up and you get on the site and you sit there listening so you can contribute, you're all being fooled. It's a typical shell game. They got you looking to the left when the real work is being done on the right. And, it's the same thing with NASA. 2 years ago, the president shut down the space shuttle, and he challenged NASA to be more daring and brilliant and set your goals further and stuff like that. And then a couple of months later, I'm watching the news. It was December of 2012. I'm watching the news, and there it is on CNN. They land the X-37B lands on an aircraft carrier. It's a remote-controlled drone of the space shuttle. They had been flying it since 1999. Think about that. Did you know we had a drone space shuttle since 1999 flown by the Air Force under the Air Force's space program? Nobody did. So, we look at SETI, we look at NASA. Those are the placebos. They got us looking to the left, watching that stuff, where the real stuff is being done by the Air Force. It's being done over here on the right. And when, the drone space shuttle stuff is the stuff they're going to give NASA, NASA will then start launching drone space shuttles unmanned because the Air Force has a better craft that they're using and they've been out to the stars with. And that's how it works. And the goal is to keep that technology from getting in the hands of Russia and China so they can't hack into it, because that's what they do. China steals all of these secrets from us. They've advanced themselves 50 years worth of technology because they stole it all from us. And, I do got to say, I believe 100% that this stuff is happening. It's all covered up by the CIA mostly and the Air Force. But I do think that they're doing this to protect us. I really do think that. It's all about the technology. They believe we can't handle the truth. They believe they have to protect us like a parent protecting a child. But they are doing this to protect America. I believe that 100%. It's all illegal, unconstitutional. But, you look at the average person, how's your day? Well, I went to McDonald's, I was on my iPhone, and who's going to be on Dancing with the Stars? That's all they care about. They don't care about this stuff. And if you put it out to the media that we're doing this, the questions, which is accountability though, but they will sensationalize it, and the questions are never ending. And, it's so much easier to just do it secretly. Most people don't know that the Air Force's space program's budget has been higher than NASA's since 1982. Now, how is that possible? The space program is run by NASA, but the Air Force space program has always had a higher budget. That's a fact. You can look it up. And they do more than just spy satellites. They're doing all this other stuff. But I do, like I said, I do believe it's all done to protect us. It's all done for the technology. It could be used to help us, but they're not going to do that because they're worried about the military application. So I think we got all of this stuff, but it's going to be spoon-fed to us over our lifetimes.
Okay, one thing I do want to discuss that you brought up in conversation at the MUFON symposium during your talk. You brought up the NSA a few times in conversation, and a couple of other people did. It's interesting how ET contactee Alex Collier, he was talking about the NSA's technology all the way back in 1995, and he said that some of the technology the NSA uses is actually reverse engineered from extraterrestrial technology, and he asserts that malevolent gray aliens from Orion are the ones in control of the NSA to some degree. He even said the NSA's base is on the moon. You talked about how the NSA, you said they're the best at what they do, among other things. Well, they are in many regards the real shadow government. One of the episodes of Hangar 1 was shadow government, and that's what the NSA is for all practical purposes, and their surveillance system, it's not for what they tell us it is. But Stan Friedman has talked about how he's trying to file Freedom of Information Act in regards to the NSA. So there appears to be some sort of a connection between the NSA and UFOs and ETs. Could you perhaps comment on that?
Well, my talk at the symposium was really on the media, the scientific community, how I think it's all phony, and why you can't trust them, and you got to listen to alternative media like these shows, and read some of the other books and stuff that are not mainstream out there, and I talked a little bit about that. There are, and these are the things that convince me there are. Freedom of Information Acts that the NSA has been involved with UFOs. The CIA, there are memos there regarding UFOs. The FBI, there are memos there regarding UFOs. So, I would challenge, and I say to people this in my other lectures, show me the memos on ghosts and Bigfoot. And I'm not saying they're not real, but show me the memos that show the government's involved in Bigfoots. The Air Force has taught a program for 3 years to their cadets. They had a chapter on UFOs. The fire department has a chapter on UFOs. I don't see a chapter on the Bigfoot attack. I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't exist. It could exist. But those are the things that convince me that this is all real. So, I think the NSA, they're all deep into this. The Air Force originally wanted to tell the public about UFOs. They didn't know how to tell the public. So they turned it over to the CIA. And the CIA, once they looked into it, and, you had the Brookings Institute look into it, and then they basically came back and said, you can never tell the public about this. This is, it has to be above top secret. You have to debunk, the witnesses. You have to make fun of them, and you've got to keep this thing, a huge secret. So, that's my spin on the NSA, the CIA. Like I said, I think they do all of this to protect us. I really think they do. I think it violates the Constitution, but it's probably in our best interest, to an extent, because I think a lot of this can be used to help society, and they're never, ever going to give us that.
You're entitled to your own opinion, although I do agree to disagree with you on a couple of things there. But anyway, let's not divert on that. One thing I do want to talk about is the whole issue of governments keeping secrets and all that. That subject came up in conversation during the
hold on a second. There was another. Hold on a second. There was one other point I wanted to make, and I kind of lost my train of thought as I'm talking. Is we talked about the NSA, the listening, thing that they created out in Utah, right? Now, in my talk at the symposium, and it's in my Apophis 2029 book, in the chapter on Homeland Security, I have I think it's 4 pages there on the NSA and what they do and the listening and the spying that takes place, right? Now, I published that book before the news of the NSA came out in 2013. You can look at the copyright on my book. You can see when that hit Congress, which was about 4 months later when it hit the news, and they claimed they knew nothing about this. So how is that information in my book? And where I got it from was an article by Wired magazine that had the whole story on the NSA. So that's all part of the cover-up. I wanted to mention that. I had lost my train of thought, but that's all part of the cover-up that, they know what's going on. Congress, some of the editors of the largest newspapers, and we can prove that the NSA was doing this, months before. The Wired magazine and my book prove the NSA was doing this, and Congress said that they had no knowledge of it, and the largest newspaper said they had no knowledge of it. Well, the information's out there before the story broke, so somebody's lying here. But I did want to throw that in. So go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, the whole issue about governments keeping secrets did come up in conversation during that disclosure hearing that you showed us, where Richard Dolan, Linda Moulton-Howe, Stan Friedman, and one of the Rendlesham Forest witnesses gave testimony to people of government, and that thing is still in the works. I encourage people to go to the site factsonwashington.org. That's FAXonwashington.org, and do the email and the Twitter blasts that the site talks about to try to encourage people to the people in government to disclose the ET cover-up. That was brought up in conversation during the symposium. I do want to bring that up, but the issue of government keeping secrets, because I know Stan Friedman always talks about this in his talk, saying governments can't keep secrets and all, and here's how they do it. Well, I remember during the symposium, one guy said that Roswell was not the really big turning point in regards to the UFO ET thing. It was actually the Orson Welles War of the Worlds radio broadcast, because that showed that humans can't handle the truth. Humans are like the animals. Like Jordan Maxwell uses this analogy for humans. He says they're like the animals that on the African savanna that graze by the river, basically waiting to get eaten by the lions and other predators, and then the lions jump out at them, and the animals, even though they outnumber the lions and other predators like over 100 to 1, they're all running away screaming. Well, the same thing happened during Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast, and that showed that humans, they can't handle the truth, and that ties into something that I've said many times on my show, and I regret to say that I have to say it again, but hey, I feel an obligation to say it, and if it comes up in conversation, I should, even though I don't like saying it, and that is that while the vast majority of significant government secrets actually have been exposed by whistleblowers, conspiracy theorists, and investigative journalists, it's very easy for governments to get away with their secrets being exposed, because a very significant percentage of the common people who make up the general public on planet Earth are so paradigmatic, so fearful, and so flat-out stupid that they will refuse to believe something shocking or disturbing, even if the evidence shows that they have no choice but to believe it. And one person during the conference actually made that clear when he said even if a ET did show up on the White House lawn and then left shortly after, people in the world would still deny that it happened because they are so lost in a trance. Now,
that was actually my presentation. I said that about Orson Welles, and I asked the public, the crowd there. I said to them, "What was the most significant thing that happened in ufology?" And I said, "I know you're going to say Roswell," and all the hands went up. Roswell, and I said, "No, it's not Roswell. It was 1938, the panic broadcast." Because that set the tone. That convinced them that we can't be told the truth. And that's exactly what happened. The Brookings Institute refers to that and says people can't be trusted with the truth. And it's a fact. And, what's interesting, I was reading a book, this 80-something-year-old guy in Ohio, MUFON, comes over to me at their conference a couple of years ago. He hands me this book on Fatima, the sighting by the 3 girls in Fatima, Portugal. And he says, this is a UFO encounter. So I'm reading the book, and it's on page 196 of the book. There's Cardinal Ratzinger, and he gives a policy statement. Now, he's representing the Vatican, of course, but he says when you have knowledge of a secret, you can't tell the public just to satisfy people's curiosities unless you can do something about it. And he says when you know that millions of people will die in seconds and there's nothing you can do about it, you can't tell them. So, that all falls in the same, line of thought, with the panic broadcast, with the, the Brookings Institute, with the CIA, et cetera. They're not going to tell you this stuff because the average person can't handle it. And what are they going to tell you for? There's nothing they can do about it. Let's say we haven't been infiltrated. We didn't have not that we haven't been infiltrated. We don't have an agreement that we're chasing them still and they're doing what they want. What are you going to do? Tell the public that these creatures are 1,000 years ahead of us and can do whatever they want, but Luckily, there's only 5 craft and 25 of them, but they will do whatever they want. So if you encounter one, you're dead meat. They can't go out and say that. That's not going to happen.
Right. Another subject that I want to discuss that pertains to Hangar 1 that I think that is utmost importance. I have often talked about how on my show, scientists, and especially scientists in archaeology, if you reveal anything that goes against mainstream archaeology, you will lose your job. One of the classic examples of that is how in a documentary that's on the UFO TV Studios YouTube channel called A New History of Early Man, scientists found incontrovertible evidence that humans were on the North American continent in 250,000 years ago, long before mainstream scientists. But all the scientists who agreed with that, and one scientist in particular they talked about, don't know her name, but they do reference her a lot in this regard. She lost her job. All the other people that agreed with her lost their job too, and all the scientists who went along with mainstream science did not lose their jobs. And this ties in somewhat with the thing in the Hangar 1 episode about how pilots who, even though like in the early 1950s this wasn't an issue, when pilots who said they saw UFOs, they didn't lose their jobs. Nowadays, if a pilot starts talking about how he sees UFOs, he'll lose his job in a heartbeat. All the more evidence that there is a UFO ET cover-up, and the government and probably the Federal Aviation Administration, no doubt, is in on this conspiracy to make sure pilots who expose what they saw lose their jobs. This is a big deal. We got to find a way to stop this. How do you propose we put a stop to this issue of pilots losing their jobs if they said they saw UFOs?
Yeah, well, what actually happened was in 1954, the Pentagon met with the airline industry. This happened in 1954, and they came to an agreement that military restrictions would be placed on commercial pilots. That's a fact. And if any pilot went to the media, starting in 1954, and told them they saw a UFO, then they were subject to espionage laws, which was like a $10,000 fine, 10 years in prison. It was ridiculous. So they scared the crap out of these pilots. And that was really on the books for 4 years until 1958, when Captain Killian went public with his UFO sighting. And Project Blue Book, he was flying from Newark to Detroit, and it happened over Pennsylvania. That's why I know about it. And Project Blue Book looked at it and said that Captain Killian was a drunk. Well, they made Captain Killian didn't even drink. So, he got irate, and he took Blue Book on, and he had a public, media got together, and he told them exactly what happened with the UFOs. And if you want to come after my job, go ahead. But this is what happened. I don't drink, and I know what I saw. So that was what set the tone on these pilots. But even though that was 1958, that they didn't prosecute anybody and they dropped that law, we know 1986, Captain Taruchi, Japan Airlines, he reports his sighting over, Alaska, and he immediately gets a desk job. So really the only thing that can be done with this would be you almost have to have the president come out, and say that we want people, as long as you had a UFO sighting that was not a known, government project, a secret, you're not revealing a government secret. But if for pilots and military people that have seen a UFO, we want you to come forward and report that. That's what it would take. Not that you're reporting a known, secret project you were working on, but, you were in a plane, or you're a pilot, or you're in the military and you saw a UFO. We want to encourage you to come forward. But then you would need some sort of reporting system. The government doesn't want to create another blue book, and I don't think we should. I don't think we should have the government running this. I think MUFON could run it, get the funding and some grants, and then we do the analysis, we do the interviews, and work with the government to do some of the analysis that's needed, that costs a lot of money, and that's what inhibits us. When we do a TV show and they help us with the financing, to analyze the Bucks County case, for example, half of that was done because Discovery Channel gave us the money and paid for the the analysis that was done at the 3 labs. Otherwise, we couldn't have done that, So, so that's my answer with that.
Thanks. Just so you know, actually, a little over 10 minutes of speaking time. I guess I'll give you. It depends on how long it takes me to cover this. So we'll do this subject, and if we have time, maybe another. About 10 minutes left in the show. Just so you know. One subject I want to discuss, and I did talk about this with you at the conference. I noticed that many of the people who were presenting, in order to plead their case that there must be life in the solar system and other parts of the universe and the galaxy, they use the Goldilocks zone factor, like how many percentage of planets would be in the Goldilocks zone, and also they use the Drake equation to determine how many planets there would be in the galaxy. But there are people who would assert that anyone who uses the Drake equation and the Goldilocks zone, they're being way too conservative because, and John Lear discussed the science behind this in my interview with him, and there are others who say, yeah, what he's saying is true, that every planet, it doesn't matter where the planet is, how big or small the planet is, or what type of star the planet orbits, every planet has its own consciousness filtering system, which allows for life to exist on the planet regardless of its size, location, or the type of star it orbits. John Lear said that the stars, and like our sun, they're actually not powered by nuclear fusion. They're actually electromagnetic. They get their power from a universal web of electromagnetic energy, and that's the real reason why the corona is so much hotter than the surface. And planets, like stars, are hot spots on this universal web of electromagnetic energy, and planets are cold spots, so to speak, and the stars, they emanate the electromagnetic consciousness energy to the planets, and the planet, and specifically the atmosphere, converts it into some form that can sustain life on every planet, regardless of where the planet is and all. And some people say, well, that's ridiculous, because if that was true, then why aren't we getting radio signals from other planets in our solar system that have life on them? Well, who's to say they're using radio signals? Maybe they're communicating through other higher forms of intelligence like telepathy and all. And some would say, well, this validates the work of Zecharia Sitchin, because people say Zecharia Sitchin's theories about Nibiru can't be right because the Anunnaki can't survive on Nibiru because it's too far from the sun. Well, no, if this planetary filtering system thing is true, then that's not a problem at all. And, well, some would say, well, maybe if this is true, it's still not in your best interest to talk about it because it can't be proven. But hey, many assert, yeah, there is truth to this. We're being lied to by mainstream science in this regard. So do you think maybe we should perhaps start taking this idea a little bit more seriously? And you got about 8.5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we did, the Project Ozma did get hits, and that's why it was moved to Arecibo. That's a fact, but it's all covered up. I don't believe that we have the kind of science, that can prove anything in this field. I think life is abundant out there, but even if we do take the stats that the government gives us, and NASA and JPL and all of those, they just said, I think it was about a year ago, that the Milky Way galaxy alone has 8.8 billion planets just like Earth in the Goldilocks zone, which could create a life form similar to us or planets that we could actually go to and live on. So if we take their stats alone, that's 8.8 billion times 250 billion other galaxies. I mean, you get a number that, I think it's a 2 with 23 zeros. I mean, 23 zeros is an incredible number. So, statistically, probability, life is absolutely abundant. And I think that, even on the worst planet, I think there is some form of life there, whether it's, a bacteria or something that's living there, even if it's, a volcanic planet, a sulfuric planet, there is life there. And I think a lot of the life is probably even on the moons. So now you take that number of 8.8 billion planets in the Goldilocks zone. A lot of their moons are watery, they're frozen. The life could be actually on the moon and not the planet. And so now you can multiply it by an average of, whatever the planets average, 2 moons each, 3 moons each. I mean, it's absolutely incredible the amount of life that's out there. But, we're primitive. we just got finished saying the Earth isn't flat, the Earth is round, but now we're fighting this battle about whether there's life in space and whether we've ever been visited. And you get it kills me when I hear SETI and they put them on these TV shows and interviews. They always go to SETI first, and it's Jill Tarter or it's Seth Soschek. And, of course, they always stick it to us and say that there's no evidence we've ever been visited. There's no evidence that there's life in space. We believe there is, but there's no evidence. And the reason they say that is because the first time they admit that any of these cases we've worked on is real and they've been here, the funding stops for listening to radio waves in some distant galaxy. Why would you be listening to radio waves when they're already here? So, my stand on this, I think it's very different than a lot of the other ufologists out there. I get a lot of flack from a lot of people in this field who don't agree with me. I think life's abundant. I think there's multiple species out there. I think this whole abduction thing is evil. It's not here to help us. Show me what we've been given by these extraterrestrials that's here to help us. We've back-engineered stuff by observing them and trying to back-engineer the handful of crashes that have taken place, but they haven't, openly opened their arms and given us anything. They haven't shown themselves, So I say this whole thing is as far as I can see, it's evil. We're just a science project, and that's a lot of what's in my book, The Alternative History of Mankind. I try to retell our history as though, they have always been here. That's the premise of the book. I'm not saying maybe, well, whatever, this, that. No, they have always been here. So now I went back and looked at history, looked at things that happened in history, whether it's the Mayans, whether it's the Egyptians, what was the influence of these extraterrestrials? And like I said, you got to remember, there are multiple species. At any time, there could be, 10, 5, 3 different species here. I think the bulk of them are here to observe, just like we would be, in a science project. But I think a lot of them are not here to observe. I think they're here to take what they need, to take samples. It's almost the opposite of Star Trek, as far as non-interference. And not interfering with the culture. Some of them are here for whatever their purpose is, to take whatever it is that they need. And and I get in a lot of arguments in the field over this because some people say they're here to help, and it's all this new age thinking. They're here to help us. They're here to help us transform into the next level of consciousness, and they're here. I haven't seen them do anything good for us. But when I listen to the descriptions of these abductions, and I look at how many people disappear a year, we've got 250,000 missing persons reports a year in the United States. About 90% of the people are found, runaways, they go home. There's about 30,000 people a year just disappear, gone. Some are murders, some are homicides. Okay, I get that. Some is human trafficking where they're taking kids and women. I get that. But there are so many people that disappear, and some of them just disappear because of this UFO phenomenon. So I don't think they're here to help us. I have a completely kind of different view. I don't put a lot of faith in science. I don't think we're anywhere near the type of science that can prove this. I think that even if you can prove it, it won't be proven because of financial considerations in a lot of cases. Like I said, when you prove something, funding ends. You take, I wanted to mention also with the, archaeology, you brought that up. I said, I remember watching the special on the Shroud of Turin, and they were talking about whether that was Jesus's or belonged to Jacques de Molay of the no, not the Templars. I'm trying to think what it was called now. The Freemasons, right? Because it dated to 1300, and Jacques de Molay was killed, was beaten and tortured in 1307 when the Pope and the King of France turned on the Templars, and he was the head of the Templars and Freemasons, right? So they said, nope, this Shroud of Turin is only 700 years old, and it goes back to 1300. So the Freemasons say that belonged to actually him and not Jesus. Then they go back. Then they come out and say, well, the shroud was stored, and there was a fire, and the smoke and everything from the fire threw off the carbon dating. So I'm sitting here saying, okay, so now we say if things aren't static, if anything changed, it can throw off the dating. A fire threw off the dating. It was probably the shroud of Jesus, but because there was a fire, it threw off the dating. And they're not going to let you take a fiber from the center of it. They took it from the end that was exposed to the smoke. So I said, so now you want me to believe that carbon dating is correct with dinosaurs, with fossils, with all of this stuff. It just, our science doesn't add up. I don't believe for 1 minute you can find a fossil of a dinosaur with flesh still on it like they found in China. That doesn't happen 65 million years later unless your dating system, your radiometric dating system is off. You still there?
Yeah, you paused for just a moment, but I got you there. All right, but unfortunately, we do have to bring this show to an end. And with that being said, I'll tell you the same thing I tell all of my guests. You're a fascinating individual. You do a lot of work to enlighten us and expose truths to us. And I have no doubt that I could do a second show with you if I wanted to. But with that being said, one of my goals with this radio show is to get as many different people on the show as possible before I start giving any one specific guest double dips. So while I could do a second show with you if I wanted to, I probably will not be asking you to come on again, but that's only because I need to give a lot of other fascinating individuals a chance at some glory on my show. But John, this was a fascinating interview. I enjoyed having you on. We talked about a lot of things besides just UFOs and aliens, like 2012 and Apophis and stuff like that. So it was a pleasure having you on. I hope to see you at a future UFO symposium, MUFON symposium. Keep up the good work, and best of luck to you.
Yeah, and we need to talk up the Bucks County Conference, October 9th and 10th, since you're based in Philly. I mean, we really got to try to talk that conference up.
All right. You mean October of 2015? Yeah,
October 9th and 10th of 2015.
All right, I'll definitely keep in the loop on that, and I'll know what township is it going to be in.
It's in Bucks County. It's at the Sheridan, right by the Oxford Valley Mall. I'll email you the information as we get it.
Oh, that's the same hotel I think that the Free Your Mind conference is going to be this upcoming April. Okay, I gotcha. All right, yeah. So well, thank you for giving your take on that. Also, thank you for the inside scoop on the second season of Hangar 1. So without further ado, John, take care. It was a pleasure having you on.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, take care. Later.
Bye.
Bye. Well, folks, that's the end of this show. Linda Moulton Howe is actually the guest next week. Mentioned having her on earlier. She is actually the guest next week. It will only be an hour show, though, from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know why she didn't want to do 2 hours, but hey, that's her prerogative. Maybe I'll give her a second hour some other time. We'll talk about a whole slew of things, cattle mutilations, and also the stuff she talked about in her conference presentation. So without further ado, namaste, everybody. Take care. Hope you learned something from this. Enjoy the rest of your trek throughout infinite consciousness. This is Andrew Fisher of Nature of Reality Radio, signing off.